Centralized systems have their functions, but they're not the way that we're going to rebuild the new world. It's going to come from the soil and from the humans who are connected with the soil. It's from the grassroots.
The more we've moved away from the wild, the less nutritious, the less nutrient dense, essentially the less sort of alive or vibrant the food becomes. It can all change when you're in relationship with land and you can actually build yourself, or you can live a lower impact life that's more in tune with the land.
Hello and welcome. We are back with Series 7 of this show. For those of you that might be new to us or maybe don't know the backstory, this podcast that you are listening to has been going now since 2017. I started it before podcasts were what they are today, as I had such a craving to go deeper and explore some of the bigger questions in our humanity at this time. Before we were a podcast, we started as a project in 2010 called Think, Act, Vote, a radical think tank exploring new and creative ways to shape our future and communities. Over these 13 years, I have shared and listened to so many voices, so much wisdom, and been a catalyst for so many connections. I am incredibly grateful for everyone who has been part of this to date, and something inside of me has kept this going and growing, evolving into new iterations, and shifting my focus as my understanding deepens, and so does the collective story. It is my dream this year that the membership grows so that we are fully supported in bringing this podcast, our events and experiences to you. We have some way to go to get there. If you can, please do go to our membership page on allthatweare.org and join. There is a sliding scale so you can choose how much you give. We have some new offerings for members, including Soul Space and the Going Deeper sessions. The more of you that join, the more we can offer into the membership. And of course, it keeps our podcast episodes full length and free and accessible for all. For us, this is not about content creation or adding in more noise to the mix. We are all about creating a space that is free from agendas to explore the world that we live in with curiosity and grace. My guests today are Seth Tabatznik and Tasha Stevens-Vallecillo from the team at 42 Acres, where this year I am an ambassador. As part of this, I'm hosting monthly events in the yurt of the Somerset Retreat Centre, as well as the Beautiful Leadership Retreat. As we live through these complex times, we are invited to connect more deeply to who we are and our relationship to nature. The Beautiful Leadership Retreat invites you to be a leader of your own life and have the courage to live with intentionality and vision and soul. This dominant culture that we are in entrains us to be followers. And I really feel that this is a time where each one of us is being called to step into beautiful leadership. And for me, this means being able to access the intelligence that we already have. We need to learn to listen more deeply to the intelligence that is all around us, the intelligence of our bodies, our intuitive wisdom, the wisdom of each other, and the whispers from the more than human world. Beauty is what stirs us as humans, what brings meaning to our lives, and what invites us to leave a legacy for future generations. We are all leaders, as each one of us and the choices we make impacts the future. In these times of uncertainty, we need to lead with creativity, intuition, and rest, so we may bring something new into this world that moves us away from burnout and extraction culture. Each morning, you'll be embodying themes of intuition, creativity, and courage as I weave these activations into the yoga and meditation practices. The days and evenings will give space to explore how to live and lead from a place of soul through ritual, workshops, and connection with nature. Over the days, your nervous system will rest and recharge with this community, leaving you clearer, more inspired, and able to live from a place of beautiful leadership. 42 Acres offers stunning spaces for us to explore both inside and out in the wild. Over our time together, we will eat fresh, nutritious meals sourced from the land, from soil to gut. Enjoy a candlelit forest dinner, fire ceremony, woodland sauna, and wild swimming in the lake. The expert team at 42 Acres will deliver a wildlife tour, including the beavers and foraging walk. At the end of this time together, you will feel renewed in your vision of the future, refreshed in your body, and reminded of the beauty of our earth. We have just a couple of spaces left if you feel the call. I am delighted to be breaking our usual format this episode with not one, but two guests. Seth Tabatznik is an avid proponent of regenerative, diversified, and decentralised systems. As co-founder and CEO of 42 Acres, a regenerative estate and wellbeing retreat in Somerset, the UK, he is devoted to developing living examples of the much-needed transformations of our times through our connection with nature, self, and others. In 2019, he established the Be the Earth Foundation to merge impact investing and philanthropy through programs and partnerships that focus mainly on regenerative food systems. In addition, Seth serves on the boards of alternative education organizations such as Advaya and the Do Group, as well as international leaders in regenerative agriculture, including Belltowns Farms in the US and the Boshendal Estate in South Africa. Tasha Stevens-Vallecillo is head of land and food at 42 Acres. She is part of the Vision Circle alongside 42 Acres founders. She has lived off-grid for 13 years, accruing skills in fossil fuel-free farming, expertise in foraging, outdoor mushroom growing using ancient techniques, and bee-centric beekeeping. Tash is a practicing Buddhist and intuitive, and supports 42 in the quest to continuing alignment and deepening towards the vision of connection to nature, self, and other. In this conversation, entitled Wild Gardens of Integrity, we explore the themes of agriwilding, philanthropy, and retreats as we speak to the question, how do we live in harmony with the land, with ourselves and each other? I hope that this conversation opens up a deeper way of relating to yourself and the land that you are part of. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies, to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. It is an absolute delight to be here with both of you, Seth and Tasha. I feel that from what I understand about the model of 42 Acres and the way that you're doing things, it feels really important to have multiple voices and also to be able to go deeper into the land part of this really inspiring, beautiful and enormous project that you are part of. I'm going to ask both of you to share what a beautiful future means to you. And then we're going to dive deeper into the story behind 42 Acres and everything that's happening now. And so, Seth, can you share, what does that mean to you, a beautiful future, and how we can co-create it?
Thanks, Amisha. The first thing that comes up for me is, on some level, it's already here. Not only do I mean that metaphorically, but, sometimes we have these incredible opportunities in life to be out in nature, to be with the sound of birds, to feel the wind on our skin, in the home, to be with our family, to have meaningful conversations, and to be with ourselves, whether that's being with our breath, whether that's being in a workshop, a retreat, some kind of environment that helps us connect more deeply to our true selves. And so when you ask the question of what a beautiful future looks like, it's really just all these incredible ingredients that already exist in the world that are around us all the time. And so I don't feel like it's anything outside of us. I know, of course, there's so much suffering in the world and so much challenge and obstacle to overcome. There's so much opportunity for change in so many ways. And yet I just feel like it's all here. And there's always that possibility of finding a more beautiful future now. So that's what comes up when you ask the question.
Thank you, Seth. Tash, what would you like to share?
When I thought about this question, I feel really blessed to be at 42 acres because I feel like we get to share in a miracle happening every day in many ways. And when I'm there, I see a level of nature's abundance that I think is rare to be finding now in England at this time. And what I feel I witness is nature's insane capacity for recovery. It's way deeper, stronger, bigger than any of us know, in my sense of it. And I feel that we're at a turning point where more and more people are coming to discover that we're just outcroppings of nature. For me, a kind of beautiful future is a place where our daily lives are in celebration of our true nature, which is just ourselves as nature, and cultivating our environment in a way that honours that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Seth, can you share with us a little bit around your vision for 42 acres and why you've taken on this and what it is that it means to you?
The first thing to say is that it was a collective vision and a seed that was planted with myself and my sister, Lara, about 9 years ago now, 8-9 years ago. And the seed that was really planted in 42 acres was the idea that change starts from inside out. If we want to make a meaningful difference in the world, we need to start with ourselves and we need to transform inwards. That seed has evolved over time with the same DNA that was originally planted. And I would say that we came to the name of 42 acres because so much of who we really are and the change that needs to happen in the world is around our relationship to land and to nature, and reminding ourselves that we're not separate from nature, we are nature. And the name was there as a reminder for the land and to honor the land of which we were and still are custodians. In terms of the vision of what played out from that seed that was planted, so much of it really is that we don't have living examples in the world, or we do, but not enough of them. Maybe we sometimes refer to them as lighthouses or kind of beacons of transformation in the world, which are homes for new ways of living, new ways of being, new ways of being in relationship with ourselves, with nature, and with each other. And so much of that is rooted in old ways, that in many ways it's new because it's in these new times. And so the old ways of just replicating in an identical form what we may have learned from our predecessors, from indigenous communities around the world, those ways of living are so relevant but not replicable now. And so within the complexity of the modern system that we find ourselves in, we have different tensions around creating something which is economically viable. And so much of what 42 Acres is about is creating this home, this place where people can go to work on themselves, to be in deeper relationship with themselves, others, and nature, but also somehow integrating that into the capitalist system. A goal for us around finance just being financially resilient. To us, it's kind of insanity that there's still ever a mindset of profit maximization that exists in the world. There's no logic to it in these times where we're going to have all the money in the world but nowhere to spend it. And so we do recognize that if we're going to be somehow a living example for others, that we have to be financially resilient. And so what we're trying to do is recognize the value of nature, the value of the people that look after the place, the employees, the staff, and so many others that are part of the wider ecosystem, and make that work in a way that doesn't compromise the earth, that doesn't compromise people's well-being. That includes having a head of well-being within the team, even though we're a very small team, because it's something that is such a huge part of what the place is about, even though there's not necessarily an economic justification for that. It also means growing our own produce in a way that isn't typically economically viable, because we're not paying minimum wages, we're not paying living wages, we're paying way above that, because we also recognize the value that land workers and farmers bring. We're foraging a lot of our own ingredients. So how can we do all of these things to really honor what we're trying to create in the world, to be a living example and remain economically viable? So I'd say a lot of the vision is around being that living example for other places, as well as being a home for people to come to see a different way of living, a different way of operating within a team, and a different way of relating to themselves, to others, and to nature.
There's so much that you shared there, which is really beautiful. And I feel that the part about not maximizing profits is really interesting, because even with all that we know is happening, it's still so much the way that our world is operating. And I suppose many of us are wondering, when is that shift going to take place? We keep seeing and experiencing more and more crises all over the world. And we had the pandemic, which was this opportunity to change the way that we do things dramatically. And yet it does feel like everything's kind of going back to how it was, and perhaps even worse, because there's a lot more kind of fear and panic and loss kind of in the mix. And I wonder how you have been able to make that work, especially with a business that has really high costs, and also how other people react to that notion, especially perhaps other people that have land or are doing similar projects, in that kind of that change of mindset, which takes into account so much more the future.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that we're not financially viable at the moment. And there's a dependency on myself, my sister, our family to support the project. And, in terms of building financial resilience, that means not depending on any one source of revenue. And so far that's come largely from myself, my family. And I'm very privileged and lucky to be able to fill in that gap. And I'm aware that not everyone has that luxury, but many do. And I think that's the important thing, that, a lot of the other work I do is I have an organization that I'm part of called Be the Earth. So much of that work is really around this idea that we have to change our relationship to money, in that, there's so many other wealth holders in the world, and I would consider myself one, or a wealth steward, because I also recognize that, I don't really own it. I'm just in this body in this lifetime stewarding something and having influence over it. But there's so many people in my position that are still focusing on this goal of profit maximization, looking at how can I get a better return in the world. Billionaires out there that are focused on getting a 10 or 12% return from an investment that is literally undoing the work they're doing, or that they believe in, around people, the environment, like their real passions. There's such separateness, like it's a form of schizophrenia, like capitalist schizophrenia, where you're investing for profit on the one hand, and then, giving that money away to something that's actually fighting against where the investments are going. And so when I take the whole ecosystem of all the different things that I'm doing, whether it's through 42 Acres or Be the Earth, I see it really as one collective vision, and different pieces of that play different roles. So within all of that, I've been able to bridge a gap to subsidize 42 Acres up until a point at which it's break even, which we're kind of at that point more or less now, and really trusting that all of that needed to happen, that all of the investment over the years that and all the mistakes that may have been made in running any kind of organization. It's really there for the good of sharing with others, like these are the mistakes not to make. I always tell other people when they're starting their own spaces, other venues, like it's honestly my biggest blessing ever to come and help and tell you everything we did wrong, because it wasn't wrong. We did that so that next people don't have to, because we need so many more of these spaces around the world that are in deeper relationship to the land, that are growing food in a more connected way. And I know Tasha will talk more about that with our philosophy around Agriwilding. But we need so many more of these spaces, because if we had, millions of them around the world, our food system would be completely different. We wouldn't need this centralized, globalized capitalist food system kind of transporting food all over the world. The insane trade that happens around food logistics, packaging, and we would be healthier in our bodies. We'd be more connected naturally to the seasons, to seasonality, to pollens. These are the things that I would love to share all of the learnings over the years with others, and I do. So I see that as a huge success, that if everything we've done to date hasn't worked out economically for myself, that's because it's to support the greater good of others in creating more and more of these spaces in a much more efficient way. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. And it brings me to that sort of saying that the future's here, but it's just not evenly distributed. We see that there are, so many millionaires and billionaires, and there's been a lot of wealth creation during the pandemic, whilst many other people have been really suffering. And yet what we tend to see is that when people are wealth stewards, that's often not how they see themselves. And in fact, that there's more of a story of like, well, I earned this and I can do what I want with it. And that there isn't that sense of real, genuine philanthropy and really living one's values and using that as an opportunity. And I wonder if there was a turning point in your life, or something that happened for you and your sister, or if it was a combination of different things and that made you really become so dedicated to the work that you're doing.
I definitely don't think there's a single moment in life, because even when we speak of certain turning points in life, it's all those other things that happened before it needed to happen in order to get to that point. For me, it was certainly more of a gradual thing. And yeah, I just feel very blessed that the parents I have had, I just really honor their values. I feel incredibly lucky. And my father, for example, who he sold a couple of businesses in generic pharmaceuticals, and his root philosophy of when he started those business was all around how can I make drugs cheaper, more accessible, fighting patent laws. So, even though I would probably say there's better versions of medicine in the world sometimes than taking generic pills, I know that the intent was incredibly positive. And so that mindset's always been passed on and inherited by myself, my sister. I also feel like when I moved to the land that's now part of 42 acres about 10 years ago, something really shifted for me in my own relationship to nature, learning more about foraging, being out on the land. I had done a permaculture course maybe 5 or 6 years before that. And it's just all these different dots that have taken me through life that have constantly supported me to be more and more of who I am. And when you refer to, some of the other wealth stewards, other wealth holders who don't see themselves as stewards of wealth, yes, a lot more of my work and more recently is about supporting other people who are on that journey, not to tell them in any way or influence them in what to do with their money, because everyone is here on this planet with their own sense of purpose and their own sense of being. But it's really to support others in aligning them with what that highest purpose is, because my belief is that most people are not living in integrity with their highest self. And you don't need money in order to, for that sentence to resonate. We've all got opportunities to improve and align ourselves more deeply. And on so many levels, I believe that's ultimately why we're here. The difference is when people have large volumes of wealth that's accumulated and not used in alignment with their highest purpose, it can be incredibly destructive. And so much of what I want to see happen in the world, and particularly with my work within Be the Earth, is around supporting others to go on that journey. And that includes an inner journey, which is why we originally created 42 Acres. It's to support people to go on that journey. We also hold gatherings for wealth holders to have these kinds of conversations around what is your highest purpose in life? Why are you here? And why are you separating some of your impact investing or non-impact investing from the philanthropy that you're doing, from the places that you may be custodian of? Like, why is there such separation between all of this? What would it look like for all of these things to be so much more in alignment, so much more synergistic, and all supporting each other? Otherwise, why are you doing, philanthropic activities at all? Is it just to make yourself feel that little bit better about everything else that you're doing in the world, or to pay back some kind of karma from, your ancestry? I just think it's so important to ask these questions. And, part of having a space that we've created to do that work, when it's in alignment with these kinds of values, it then kind of brings more support for these kinds of conversations to happen.
Yeah, that's really special, because the more cynical part of me is like also, and another reason is tax breaks. And so actually really aligning oneself to what we care about in the world and what we're moved by and what we want for our future generations. And no matter what resources we have, finding a way to live that truth. And that's so much around what beautiful leadership is, what I see is possible for all of us, because we all have some resources to give, and they're different for everyone, what that might be. If you can share a little bit more about your own inner journey, and also now there's been many retreats that you've been part of, whether they are retreats around connecting deeper to the land or spiritual retreats, the kind of retreats that have been hosted at 42 Acres. And I'm curious, in terms of your own experiences of shifts and what you've seen in others through being able to host so many of these experiences.
So I'd say that no one retreat is the same. I've been on many retreats in my life, some with plant medicine, some without, most without. And yeah, every single one is different. It's also so dependent on the space, on the facilitation. Some can be a little bit deeper in terms of personal journeys, and I've been on some that are a bit more heady. What I would say, as you were speaking, the thing that came up, that I remember being in a taxi being driven to the station from 42 Acres, and all the taxi drivers in our area know the space because they're often picking people up, dropping people off. They say every time they come to a retreat and they pick people up from the station, they're on their own and they don't know anyone, and they're a bit nervous about, what's about to happen. And when they pick them up, it's always a full cab. Everyone's hugging. Everyone's like, they've known each other their whole lives. Often when I go on a retreat, it's that kind of experience. And I know for myself, when I go on retreats, I can often spend 5 days getting to know a lot of people intimately. And at the end of the retreat, I don't know their name, I don't know what they do, and I don't know where they live. And it's interesting because these are generally the things that we start with. They're like the key questions to ask people when we first connect. And those are the things that we just don't know when we go on retreats. We get below the surface and we understand the humanness that exists in every other person that we're, sharing a circle with and sharing a transformational experience with. Of course, it depends where one is in the world in terms of, food experiences. It depends, on the land itself, in the animals and, different experiences we may have with different beings coming to us in different moments. But I would say that there's consistency in that deeper connection to self and others that I don't think I've ever gone on a retreat and I haven't had that level of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so powerful how strangers appear and that nervousness, and then everyone leaves as some kind of family. And it really shows how wired for community we are. In all the things that I've done in my life, like hosting retreats and going on retreats have been such an amazing part of it, because I feel that that's when we really experience community and seeing how people look out for each other, and the conversations that come out, and the ability to share emotions in front of people that we've just met. It really deconditions us from so much of the normal ways that we live in life and what we believe is possible for ourselves. And I find that those ripples, they live on, and sometimes, lifelong friends that you met at one retreat 10 years ago, and then you've continued on a path with, maybe collaborated with in some way, or maybe gone on to experience some other kind of teaching or experience together. There's something so unique about it, as well as being in an incredible space in nature. And so all of the experiences that you're having with each other are highlighted by the sounds of an owl, or seeing the sunrise, or swimming in cold water for the first time, or those extra bits that connect you to something so much bigger and so much deeper.
Yeah, as you're speaking, the other thing that comes up for me is I'm so conscious that, the majority of our planet now lives in cities. The lifestyles we have, for the majority of people are often within the hamster wheel, and there's this inertia, and it's so hard to make changes in our lives. When we're in routine, when we're in work, when we're with family, when we've got kids, it's really difficult to make changes. It's almost like we need these opportunities, these interventions in life, and these spaces where we can go and effectively press the reset button, the reboot, and doing that in a way where we're actually reconnected to who we are, and that who is not separate from nature. It's not separate from others. And that for me is the biggest reason that retreats are such an important space that's held in the world. They're really rare. They're really sacred. It's not something you go and do every single week, because there's also the grounding of the experiences that's key. If we're going to change our life, it's, we need to step back, reset, and then implement. I know, for instance, you've got a retreat coming up at the end of March on beautiful leadership. And I just love that you do this work as well. And, knowing that space, how sacred it can be for people to come and just have this opportunity to say, what do I really want the rest of my life to be? Because it's too challenging to do it when we're in the everyday.
That's so true, that how challenging, the everyday is. And also to allow ourselves to be witnessed by others in that space of making a transition or allowing for a transformation to happen. That can be so difficult when we are in a space of the churn of all of our responsibilities. And we're also in such set patterns with the people that we're living our lives with. And it often does take that stepping away and stepping into a new experience in order to allow ourselves to have that courage. And courage is a big part of what we're going to be exploring on the Beautiful Leadership Retreat, but to have that courage to listen to our intuitions, another part of it, and then to really support each other in taking action. And then what's so wonderful is that you find yourself with these new friends that don't know anything about you apart from that they can see that spark in that the thing that you say that you want, the thing that you can feel connects you deeper to your purpose. It completely makes sense and resonates for who you are. And so you often find that you have these incredible cheerleaders that really, really want to support you in making that shift, and you get to take that back into your life. Another thing that I'm really excited about with the Beautiful Leadership Retreat is that we've collaborated on this as part of my ambassadorship with 42, and we've also been able to make a few bursary places available so that people can come on the retreat that might not normally get to go on those experiences. And I'm really grateful that we've been able to do that, because for me, that's also such a big part of this work, that I know how transformational it is. And so being able to make things more accessible in all of the ways that we can, it feels like such an important part of the offering. Seth, do you want to share a bit more about Be the Earth and the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, so we started about 4 years ago. It's a charitable organization and it's a foundation, but we typically don't like to say it's a foundation because there's this assumption that all we do is give grants. And actually, that's very little of what we do. In fact, almost zero now, because everything we now do is more program-led. And when we do give grants, they're in co-funding mechanisms, pool funds. The starting point really for Be the Earth is that we have an economic system that doesn't serve people and it doesn't serve the planet. And so we need to experiment with new ways of living, new ways of being, and create regenerative systems that do support life on Earth to flourish. And so the work we do around that is, as I said, mostly program-led. It's mostly women-focused because at the heart of it, we believe that women know how to breed life. It's part of their biological DNA, is to give life, to care for life, to nurture for life. And that's included within the concept of Mother Earth. So we generally support women in circles through programs by giving them a combination of funding and capacity support. And that support comes in the form of anything from astrological readings to marketing support to learning how to put on a podcast, which I know, Amisha, that you've supported with in the past. It's really led by those that we work with. So much of the challenge around being a wealth steward, a wealth holder, is the power dynamic that comes with it. So a lot of the focus is saying, look, we totally recognize that, we have trustees, there's a formal process that has to happen, but ultimately the knowledge, the skills, the change that needs to happen is on the ground. It's at the grassroots level. We believe in a decentralized, localized economic system. And yet we're the ones that are stewarding this wealth. So how do we get there? One of our programs, for example, works with a handful of women who re-grant. So we just say, look, we know you don't know anything about philanthropy and granting, but that's great because you're amazing human beings doing incredible work all around food systems. You know people, you collectively decide how to give the money. They come up with the governance system, the rules of how they do it, they decide who to give it to. We have another program called Flow Funding, and instead of them collectively deciding, we give the money to the individuals and say, you give the money to the grassroots, to the projects you're connected with, because we would never know all these projects on the ground. And that also comes with the fact that there's no reporting required from these grassroots organizations. They would never know how to report or have the skills to be able to write, fancy grant applications. And the reporting for these flow funders is that they sit in a circle together and share stories. And we take down the notes of what those stories were. And that's our report back to the Charity Commission.
That's amazing. And for people that don't know more about how grants normally work, that's pretty radical to actually allow the money to go where it might be the most effective, and to people that would have no idea of how to actually write those grants. And especially often the grants have to be written in a language that isn't people's first language, and people might be very, very good at the work that they're doing in their community, but not very good at like writing and tech and forms and these kinds of things. And so the way in which you've created an ecosystem there, which allows money to go to support people that are really doing really beautiful work and may not have those added extras of like knowing how to write a form in the English language, or even knowing that fund exists. It doesn't sound like much, but I know from my experience with NGOs that's a really radical, beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we're quite new as an organization, and that gives us a lot of freedom, that we're not constrained by these ideas of how philanthropy needs to be. And we've come in with the mindset that so many systems across the world need to change, philanthropy included. It's broken. The fact that philanthropy exists and is separate from where the bulk of the capital sits in the investment world, that is a broken system. We have the same humans, as I've talked about, that are doing these two completely contradictory activities. That is broken. And so, we're not saying that we have the solutions, but we know that the way to go isn't how it's been in the past. We need to try new models. We need to work more towards getting funds towards women, towards the grassroots, towards indigenous communities, because these are the groups that know how to support life on Earth. It's centralized systems have their functions, but they're not the way that we're going to rebuild the new world. It's going to come from the soil and from the humans who are connected with the soil. It's from the grassroots. And so really everything we're doing is how do you create new systems that enable this energy to flow towards supporting the projects that are supporting a local regenerative future.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today. And on the theme of women doing extraordinary work, I would like to bring you in, Tasha, to share more about your work with the land at 42 acres. Can you share what your role is and what you're up to?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing Seth speak about the broader picture of his work. I actually don't think I've heard you speak like that before, because I'm a mixed race woman. My dad's side is from Nicaragua, and my grandfather is the custodian of a very ancient recipe passed down through many generations called Nicatamal, which is an indigenous packed lunch. A lot of the work, a lot of the time in the space that has been given to me by Seth to feel into 42 and what the land is really saying, and spending time kind of experimenting, is really echoed in the philosophy of what you're talking about in your broader work, Seth. So that was really amazing to hear. So I'm the head of land and food. I hold in sort of equal parts what the land is kind of showing up for or doing herself. And the other day I wrote something like, eating is becoming one with the land. And so it's how we are relating to the land and producing food, then also stewarding the kind of recipes and the kind of all the different medicinal foods that we're using in the retreat centre. And we've recently just started selling some of the foods that we're producing as well. So we've just built a little tiny wild kitchen and opened the Hermitage. So we're also starting to supply our local community with all the different incredible foods that we get to work with in the retreat centre. And I also, probably in the first year of supporting a little bit more with the overarching vision with Seth and Lara, and looking at how do we deepen our capacities to connect to our vision and purpose. And that may come in many different forms in the future. We've been on a process of sitting on the land and listening. And what's been coming through is to look into whether we start a sort of community of people that can live there, so that 42 isn't just a home for mycelium and beavers, but it's also could be a home for people.
Well, sign me up.
So we're exploring this, and in time a school or some type of education for young people. And also something that I've been feeding into is our potential capacity to be an incubator space for other land-based projects or herbal medicinal gardens that are more kind of serving the local community. But, all of this is kind of early work. But on the land and food side, we have a biodynamic inspired vegetable garden that produces, I think, 80% of our vegetable needs at the moment in the retreat centre. And we do things like make our own home sun-dried tomatoes and make our own chutneys and make our own spreads, fruit spreads and things like this. We get to work with amazing kind of organic ingredients and very, very kind of no cane sugar at all. So we're just looking at how, what are our impacts of the things that we are buying in as well. We also have, I call it a storytelling garden, but I think we probably need an official name. But we have a space that has a lot of foods in it, like things that we do to replace sugar. So we grow stevia and we grow yacon, and we have a lemon bed. So we in the lemon bed, we're growing lemon verbena or lemon balm or quince, which is what I use to acidify preserves, because that's part of the preserving process. So all the things that you can use instead of importing a lemon, for example. It's also just a really beautiful space to walk in and sit in. We also have bees on the land. So we have bees. We have 42 acres is totally blessed with lots of wild honeybees. And so when we recently went into reconstruction of the Hermitage, which is the new side of the site, the newer side, bees started pouring down the chimney. And I was lucky enough to be able to go up with one of the builders, and we rescued the colony. So I had a woman have a chat with the Queen and say, hey, we're going to need to take you out of here. And within about 5 minutes, I found the Queen, which is really rare. And so I was able to literally kind of cut the comb out and place her in a hive. And it was actually a very easy process. We were able to put them all in the hive and lower them down. And now we'll have our first honey from this hive this year. So essentially, a lot of what I'm doing is that this in-betweeny space between conservation and farming, really. And it's where the roots of farming began. It's almost like a wild tending process. But wild tending is essentially working with nature, because nature wants to produce, nature wants to be alive and grow. And all we're doing is holding space for that to happen in a way that's mindful. The Hermitage bees are in a box now in our apiary, and they are thriving more than any of the bees that we've bought from beekeepers. And part of what I see is, this drive for heavy production. Subsequently, along the way, you lose things, and a lot of the time you don't realise what you're losing. What I see is it goes across the board. So if you look at, for example, the cow and how we've genetically bred the cow to be the Holstein cow, which is a high yielding milk producing cow, but lives a lot less time than, let's say, a Dexter or a Shetland cow. And actually, if you analyse the milk, you've increased the lactose and you've increased all sorts of things that actually our bodies find really hard to digest. So, and then if you analyse that milk in relation to a Shetland or a Dexter, because they're a much wilder breed of cow, they're browsing much more widely. They're eating all of these medicinal herbs, they're eating all of the brambles, and they're producing a milk that is of a much higher quality and much easier for our bodies to digest. And what I see across the board is that actually the more we've moved away from the wild, the less nutritious, the less nutrient dense, essentially the less sort of alive or vibrant the food becomes. So it's being really aware of that. So we're wild tending a lot of our produce, including growing things like sea buckthorn. which is a wild shrub. It normally grows on the coast. It's got vitamin A, B, D, K, P, omega 3, 6, 7, and 9. And it's got the 2 largest sections in the oldest medicinal books in the world. And it grows like a weed. I mean, it is essentially a weed.
Wow. Is that something that people could be growing in their gardens?
Absolutely, yeah. I almost sent you a photo because one of my all-time favourite foraging moments, I was in a big council estate I think it was Dalston in London. I'm from London, but I don't remember it very well. And they'd planted loads of Rosa rugosa, which is a very cheap, accessible fruit of the rose. So you get roses and then you get this fruit, and it's got the highest source of vitamin C in the plant world, in the naturally occurring world. And so one of the things that in the war, children used to have 2 weeks off school in the Second World War to be able to pick these because they were seen as sort of good for national security, for the health of the population. And I foraged about 20 kilos in about, less than an hour. So things like sea buckthorn, things like Rosa rugosas, these are all plants that are really beautiful. You can have them in your garden, but they will also provide a lot of medicine.
That is amazing. And to know that it has been part of like national service to forage in the past makes me feel hopeful that maybe we could go that way in the future. I have 2 nieces that are 5 and 7, and they know what every plant is and what every plant's for, to the point where they think it's boring how much they know and how amazed I am by it. They're like, that's that, that's that, and that's that. And I'm like, wow, how do you know all this? But the idea that we might in the future have days where, everybody is out there foraging a certain plant because we actually understand that we need that for our health and well-being, which is what being part of a healthy nation means. And we've seen through the pandemic how missing that is, and how there was no official advice around the easier things that we could have done to boost our immune systems. What else could people be planting at home?
Well, I have a little spruce tree in my garden because the pine needles, the needles are really antiviral. And I was working a lot with spruce when the pandemic hit. If I'd been super with my business hat on, we would have started selling pine needle syrup or something, because actually I found it amazing for long COVID. It's got particular properties in it that are antiviral and have antiviral properties, but also the resin. So in February time, if you cut the bark a little bit, it starts to bleed out this incredible sticky resin, and you can scrape that resin and use it to clear spaces. And again, it will clear virus from the air. So you can use the needles in tea. I suggest boiling them rather than pouring water over. So that's a decoction actually, rather than an infusion, because that helps them to release their medicinal properties. And you can see it by the water turning slightly orange. So that's really good in tea if you've got a virus of any kind, cough, cold, flu, including COVID. And then there's the resin, which I find incredibly special. I mean, it only bleeds a little bit every year, but to be able to clear spaces, or if you're having a gathering and you want the space to be really, really fresh, or also if you're doing a retreat and you want to clear the space, both of those medicines are incredibly powerful.
I love that. And also a local alternative to all of the Palo Santo and other medicines that are now being over harvested and used to clear space.
Yeah, it's something that I see. I do feel like in England and all over the world, we're waking up to, for example, medicinal mushrooms, but we're not waking up to our own local strains of medicinal mushrooms in the same way that we are to strains that are coming from abroad, like the reishi mushroom. And we're still looking for cheap medicine, really, and not perhaps appreciating the process of production, or the fact that a medicine that's produced many thousands of miles away from our human existence is going to be responding to the environment that it's grown in. And so at 42, we've done a lot of work to work with our own native strains of mushrooms on the land, we're actually isolated and cultivating our own medicinal mushrooms, which we put in the menu, and have delicious things like turkey tail chai. And turkey tail is another one that's incredible. It's the nettle of the mushroom world. It grows everywhere. It'd be impossible to overharvest it. And it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible for the immune system. I guess part of it for me as well, a huge part of the work is to do with telling the story around, or like eating these foods as a way of preventing illness, not as a way of curing. So herbalism, for example, it's a fantastic school of thought, and I have a lot of respect for her, Western and Eastern herbalism. And I still feel that there isn't enough discussion around eating medicinal foods as part of your diet. Foraged food being a key part of that, and foraged food being available to all of us, regardless of your income, regardless of who you are or where you're from. We all have access to some wild food. And actually, part of why that's not being shouted out about enough is because nobody can capitalize on that, right? So it's going through this process of, well, actually, there's medicine less than a mile away that from my house, and I'm in a town right now. There's really incredible medicine growing. And the fact that I can buy it in the health food shop or down the road doesn't make it any better because it's in a package. It's not better for me. And it's that process of really believing that, and then also skilling yourself up, because, I see a lot of fear in people around being more actively involved in their own health and in their own picking and processing. So we have to support each other, really, to feel empowered to do that, because we're born in this world with innate connection. There's a feeling of connection. And what you were saying about children foraging, I've had the same with my daughter. She learns foraging and medicine making much easier than I do. And it's just part of who she is. So now when she feels ill, she's like, Mummy, get me a sea buckthorn. And so it's just natural to her. But when we're adults, we've been separated for a long time and been given paracetamol or, cough and cold medicine, it takes some undoing. But we've all got that inside of us, It's all there, and we just have to support each other to explore and experiment within the safety confines and within the kind of honourable harvest methodologies.
Thank you for that. Feels really, really important. And yeah, it's so interesting. If you've grown up in the more hyper-capitalized times, there is a weird thing of trusting something that comes in a plastic bag more than something that you could pick yourself, even if but there's some kind of weird disconnect that kind of happens, or like you said, instead of picking something yourself, like going and spending quite a lot of money from a health food shop. I definitely bought some pine needle tea at some point, and it literally was just a bag of pine needles. And I was like, okay, I definitely could have sourced that for myself. But often there's a real fear of getting it wrong, of picking the wrong thing, or of picking the right thing, but then doing the wrong thing with it. And so that education piece is really important. And we're going to be doing some foraging workshops at the Beautiful Leadership Retreat. And I know that you're offering these as well for those that can get to Somerset at 42 Acres. And also there are now so many incredible resources and people that are offering workshops or books that you can read, or blogs that really allow us to take some power back. And as we're at this time with this cost of living crisis that we have, with the rising prices of everything, with Brexit issues and lack of tomatoes and whatever else, we are going to keep finding the break in the supply chain and not available in our supermarkets, UK supermarkets, but I'm sure it's going to happen in lots of places in the world at different times. Having more knowledge of what's around us, and that it's not even just for people in the countryside, because there are places, in Hackney where there are, you can find wild garlic, or you can find certain berries. And so it's, you can definitely find nettles, and it's just kind of knowing what to look for, where, and how to use it.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in a council estate in London, and my first foraging was the blackberries from the Hogs Mill sort of river bit that, was just the kind of left scrubland. And I think as a kid, I used to just shove blackberries in my mouth. Nobody really taught me, or at least I don't remember anyone teaching me. I was just kind of like that. And there's, London's got some amazing spots, and it's kind of like the little green forgotten spaces that can really come alive when people have time, like they did during COVID and lockdown. I think, as you said, with the cost of living crisis, people are seeking different ways of having a rich quality of life. And what I'm also seeing is with the strain the NHS are under, and the lead times for people to actually see someone are getting longer. And therefore, more and more people are being more actively responsible with their own health and what they can do to skill themselves up. And like you said, there are amazing apps and there are amazing websites and there's lots of teachers. And all I would say is that I think that fear is also an important factor, right? Like if we weren't afraid to eat something poisonous, then we would almost certainly poison ourselves. So it's an important factor in the journey to acknowledge that fear and cross-reference what you're picking. And also, like, one of the things that's worked for me is always to seek a mentor. So I have multiple mentors for all of the different things that I do, formal and informal. Friends, a lot of people, including myself. I've been doing what I do for a really long time, and there's nothing that gives me more pleasure than to share what I know with someone who really cares about learning the same thing. And so, it's going on that journey, seeking Facebook groups as well of other people going out, and also doing things like wild tending. So you can, if you want some nettles down your street, when the nettles are seeding, you can just grab a handful of seeds and throw them somewhere where you'd like to see them next year. There's little things that we can do to actually, very freely, very easily, to actually start to wild tend our spaces, to make them into medicinal gardens or food gardens. We don't have to get loads of compost and wheelbarrows and make it this big kind of intense process. You can also just do things in very small, simple ways that would give you better access.
Beautiful. And I love how some of the things that are the most beneficial are actually the ones that are really easy to grow. Like you said, once they're there, they're like weeds. They're there. Or actually, a lot of the things that we call weeds are actually the medicines.
Exactly.
It's a whole reframe that we need, and so empowering. And what better way to understand ourselves as part of nature and to connect to nature than to actually work with the medicines that we have around us locally. Can you share a bit more around growing food and the process and the challenges that you might find at 42 acres where you're growing a lot of food that's being used on the retreats, and why it's important? And so I suppose I'm having some health challenges at the moment. One of the factors related to those is that I've just been tested and there's a really high toxicity level of pesticides in my body, which could be from eating produce that has pesticides in it, and also most likely is from moving to the countryside into a farmhouse and the fields around me being sprayed with glyphosate, and the relationship between me and those pesticides has sort of meant that a lot of it's gone into my body. I can attest that it is not something that I would not recommend more people to have to go through this. And I kind of understand that I'm sensitive and often experience deeper symptoms, but we're talking about the toxification from our food and the microplastics that we now have in our bellies and the pesticides that is on most of our food, and even how the pesticides can kind of drift into produce that's grown without them. And I would love for you to share a little bit more around kind of what's happening in the world around food, and then also more around what you're doing at 42 acres.
I've been blessed with doing some work with Via Campesina, which is the largest union in the world. And I always love telling people that almost 80% of the world's food is produced on 12 acres and under. So we have this concept as modern Western people that most food comes from the industrial food model, but it doesn't. And the move towards industrialization and the pushing of technology is the answer, sprays are the answer, it's only been around for a couple of 100 years max. So actually the food system that is kind of the industrialized food system that is breaking apart and is breaking our land is in the minority in terms of food production and feeding people. And B, we're seeing, the degradation of the ecosystem and the complexity upon which we rely upon. So a rich and diverse ecosystem is what enables us to, let's say, have pollination of crops in order to eat. Therefore, if you're not taking care of the ecosystem as a whole, you're not actually going to be as productive long term. So that's the kind of the wider picture from my perspective, or from a perspective. I would probably say that our biggest challenge is the economic challenge. And I would say that making farming work whilst trying to pay people a decent wage is hard. And then you kind of want to start to drift into the economy of scale conundrum, or economy of scale driving force. And so that's something that I keep an eye on, in terms of, I sort of check myself and go, well, am I doing this because it's good for the land, or am I doing this because I'm trying to force it to be viable? And so it's kind of bearing with, being patient, and trusting that, I don't know how to say it, but there's a level of trust and communication that can happen when you're very deeply entwined with land. I trust that we are finding, and we will find our way. So sometimes things, let's say, more lucrative than I would imagine. And sometimes I see more opportunities than barriers. But other times, you're kind of waiting for something to fruit, or you're kind of hoping something will grow, and it's continuously getting bashed, and it's very easy to then start pushing against the tide of nature, which is actually the opposite of what you want to be doing. So it's a dance. There's a dance in terms of the economic relationship between land workers and land and food production. It's almost like a systemic and nationwide, if not worldwide, issue. And one of the ways that I've personally gotten around that in the past is through building my own dwellings on land. So I've been lucky enough to live on land in eco builds twice, in cob houses and wooden houses. And actually the land provides everything that you need to build houses, funnily enough. So luckily in this country, you do have rights, if you are an agricultural worker, to live on land. And there are ways to challenge the system, or to use the system to tell your story around agroecological food production. And so twice I've been lucky enough to work with those systems. And that's one of the things that we can explore at 42, is whether or not we actually start to say, well, do we want to chase money and wages, or do we want to support people to live on the land? And then they perhaps wouldn't need the same amount of money that rent costs, because rent is it's just a made up number, right? Like, it's not necessarily very real. A house that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, I mean, it's you can build a house for £20,000. So it's economics in that sense is all it can all change. It can all change when you're in relationship with land, and you can actually build yourself, or you can live a lower impact life that's more in tune with the land. So that's the sort of the economic and the personal challenge, I suppose. And then in terms of, what you were talking about, glyphosates, before we started recording, I was talking about a beekeeper that we have worked with who has people spraying glyphosate next to him, and how he has to you literally barricade the bees into the hives in order to stop them from being exposed to the glyphosates. And I don't know about that specific chemical, but I do know that I have had issues before my time at 42, where one day none of my bees returned home. So I went down to check the hives and they were just abandoned, every single one. Then a few days later, I found a small handful of each hive dead at the entrances, and their nervous system had been affected by a chemical that had been sprayed. I believe it was neonicotinoids. The blindness of the use of these chemicals, because our area was a cider farming area, and you need bees to pollinate the blossoms on the trees in order to get the fruits, in order to get the apples. And so when we pursue one type of production, or when we pursue one type of output and not consider the whole picture, that's when we start to really mess up. So it's really a time when we can start to look holistically at the whole picture, not just the thing that we want, if that makes sense. And that's hard to do. I find it hard. I find it a tension. You know, somebody said to me at a talk, but Tasha, you do so many things, you never get good at one thing. And that was by a fellow kind of agroecological farmer. So it takes a lot of backbone, I guess, to work holistically. You know, I've spoken to Seth about how we sort of work in spirals. You know, we go round and we go round until we learn a bit more, and then we, you know, it's not easy. You are under a lot of scrutiny from others, but ultimately I know that our bees are going to be collecting medicine from the medicinal mushrooms that we're growing outdoors. You know, essentially I know that every part of what we're doing, like for example the sea buckthorn and all the rose hips and all the hawthorns, they're all providing blossom and nectar for the bees to go and collect. So it's all working in symbiosis with one another. And it's just trusting that if you're actually really listening and doing what's true to you and true to the land, then it's all going to make sense in time. And you're definitely going to learn a lot along the way. I just kind of want to link it a little bit in with the rewilding movement and kind of just highlight the difference that I feel, the slight difference that we occupy, because I have so much respect for all the people that are doing rewilding. And I think it's a really incredible movement. And I love the way the British public have really gotten behind rewilding and the subsidy systems related to rewilding. And I think it's really important to notice that we can support rewilding, but some people, for example, may say, I love rewilding, I'm going to go and visit NEP, but they'll still be buying their food at Tesco's or Sainsbury's or huge kind of agro-industrial kind of models that are non-organic, for example. For me, what I say to people is, if you're part of the rewilding movement, but you're still buying food that's produced in a way that is harmful to nature, you're doing one thing with one hand and another thing with another. You know, one of the things that really excites me about 42 in our work is we're running in tandem agriculture, so food production, and rewilding. So we're, you know, growing nut trees, we're planting medicinal hedges, we're growing outdoor mushrooms, but we've also got this rewilding element, because actually when you farm in a way that's really sensitive to nature, nature happily exists alongside it. And so the beavers, you know, they may eat the odd willow tree in order to build a home instead of us being able to use it for our biomass boiler. Yeah, there's a bit of that, but really they're not in conflict with one another. And so it's to kind of speak to the agri-wilding movement and say there's a middle road. It doesn't need to be one extreme or the other.
Wow, I mean, what really lands for me with everything that you're sharing, Tasha, is how much there is to kind of understand in order to work the land holistically, work with the land, live in harmony with the land. Yeah, and then that kind of constant sort of balancing between everything. And I'm curious, Seth, what you want to share around this process of 42 acres being such a big project with so many moving parts and so much to listen to learn and I guess as well, we've got that set against changing climates. And so, there's also that in real time, things being unexpected and all of that. And I just wonder, Seth, what is it to lead something like this and how do you do it? in order to kind of make space for everyone and everything that is needed in order to make it successful?
So I'd say two things. One, I don't feel like it's any one person can lead a project like this, that we have a team and everyone does different pieces of the puzzle to make it all work together. And the second piece is that ultimately the land decides. And when we're listening, when we're in relationship, it guides us. Historically, we didn't do the best job of really deeply listening to the land. It came in waves, and there was a lot of strong guidance at certain times. In other times, it was more quiet. And there's been just a shift over the last year or so in terms of that depth of relationship and it really speaking and guiding and activating. And I personally started working with some of the trees there, which I hadn't been doing at the same level historically. And there was so much guidance and wisdom and clarity that came from them when I really opened myself up to what they had to say. Historically, you asked me about what it was to lead. I have been in and out of leading this. The way it's actually, and the only way it really works, is that something like this can't depend on one person. We now kind of co-manage. There's 5 of us that sit in circle and are really leading this collectively. We each have our own domains, but in terms of decision making around where we allocate resources, new hires, like we really are a team. And I'm actually now the least involved because I'm not on the ground. And there's also an intelligence that exists of those who are on the ground. The land speaks to more loudly and clearly. And so I've recognized that my role is more to support this structure and support the team to be able to do what they need. And now not being on the land, my role is ultimately to get out of the way, maybe be that pollinator or bird that travels around a little bit more, finding new pollination opportunities. But really, I mean, and that's what I'd say to other people who manage projects that are land-based, is the more we've started to listen, like to really listen, to spend quality time on the land, to bring in, other sets of knowledge who can train us as stewards of the land to really deeply listen, the more the land will speak and the clearer it will be and the easier things will be. Tasha's kind of spoken to it before, but the nature there, it's so abundant and it really wants to grow. If you do nothing, disappear, things will grow, but we won't as humans. And so being in relationship, rewilding ourselves as much as we're rewilding the land is, and that's why we talk about agriwilding, because we are part of nature. And therefore, when we're rewilding land, we are part of land, and therefore we need to eat. We need a food system that not only feeds animals in what we conventionally speak to as biodiversity, but we need a food system that feeds animals and humans. And that's really that middle way that we're exploring and experimenting with.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like this conversation has been so rich and so deep. There's so much there. And I just wondered if either of you have anything else that you want to share before we finish with your calls to action.
One of the things that has come to me over my time is I hope that we are part of helping to support and inspire other people to do similar things. It's one of the things that I really, really hope for the future. And as someone who's been involved, I've been involved in at least three land projects in my life. One of the biggest learnings for me, and it came through starting to meditate, was to forgive and let go. We humans, we live for a long time. We hurt each other and we hurt ourselves sometimes. When things go wrong, particularly in land-based projects or in communities, and of which I've done both, and things have gone wrong, and probably will go wrong, and relationships fall apart, it can be really hard on our systems, and we can sometimes want to give up. I've had to definitely forgive myself a lot, and I've had to forgive others a lot, and just let go. And then it doesn't get caught in the system, so that we can start fresh and learn. And showing up with compassion is actually the biggest, it's my biggest lesson, is to just respect that we're all human and we all make mistakes. That's part of our journey, and that it gets more intensified when we're on land and doing land-based projects, trying to kind of have very high ideals when we don't meet them, it can be very difficult. So it's just to say that it's the inner work, and that's why 42 is so amazing, because actually it really couples the inner work with the outer work. It's a genuine balance of both, and they are equally important. Meditation is not fluffy, and it's not for people that just want to escape. It's for people that really want to show up, and it helps you show up more.
Thank you, Tasha. I feel like that's such an important part to bring in, because I know that many of us that have been part of communities or are part of communities, that the way that we handle the conflicts is often, it's such a shame because it kind of gets in the way of so much beauty and goodness and kindness and time and energy that people put in, that often not having tools to manage conflicts well is often the death of so much of the beautiful work in this world. We could definitely talk for many hours and many more podcasts on that. And yeah, definitely something I want to delve into more this series. Seth, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, just to say thank you. I don't feel I can ever say thank you enough. And thank you for the work you do in the world, for enabling these conversations. Yeah, for supporting this movement. Yeah, I feel like gratitude is just such a secret to life, such an unsung hero. And there's always so much that we can all be grateful for in every moment. There's always something that we can seek and find gratitude for. It's something we practice at 42 Acres. We do a check-in. We say how we're feeling, what we're grateful for. It's really because gratitude and abundance mindset is something that we cultivate. And it's very easy to spend our lives focusing on all the problems, all the issues, everything that's wrong with the world, because there is so much opportunity to change things and to make a better world. And yet there's so much always to be grateful for. And I find that when we feed the gratitude and appreciative mindset, it keeps growing.
Thank you for that, Seth. And as you were speaking, I was reminded of an email exchange we had like many years ago, and that you had been listening to the podcasts on the land. And so they had been there before I had had the opportunity to come and be part of it. And it's been so wonderful to be part of 42 Acres this year, and through the ambassadorship, and just I've been hosting events every month as well for local Somerset people, although we've had people come from Dorset and Devon and Wiltshire for them sometimes, and getting to be on the land and to create these moments of deep connection and healing. So beautiful. And there are so many ways that people can come and visit 42 Acres and be part of it. So many beautiful experiences that are always happening, from shorter workshops to longer retreats. So I hope that those of you listening sometime, especially if you're nearby, get a chance to come and experience the beauty at 42 Acres. And I would love now for each of you to share your calls to action. Tasha, do you want to go first?
Sure. We have lots of courses coming up. Wild tea courses, foraging courses. So any of you are super welcome to come and join us for one of those. We also run working retreats. So again, you can come, we do a knowledge exchange for some help on the land. And this is how we do a lot of our work on the land, is we offer our knowledge freely, and people come and share their bodies and their hands freely. And we exchange in this way without the exchange of money. So I just want to invite everyone to come and be part of what we're doing. And if we are out of reach, then to just encourage people to be part of a land project in some way. So whether that's even just like the little tiny bit of grass on the corner of your street, or a community garden. I didn't say, but one of the biggest gifts of working the land is actually physically working the land. And unless you've experienced that, you're probably missing out in life. So just to encourage people to explore what it could mean to them to actually get their hands in the soil. And then I wanted to say also, I became a single parent about 5 years ago now, I think 5 years. And a huge lifeline for me was the online Dharma Hall through Gaia House, which is again offered on a donation basis. And I do a regular Sunday meditation for an hour and a half. It keeps me in check. So just to say that there's some amazing communities that offer free meditation online for donations or freely. And like I said earlier, it's a really important thing to do, to sit and allow your inner compass to arise, because otherwise we're just can be too busy to hear what's really going on. So those were my two.
So mine's more of an inner peace. What I would say is that every human on this planet knows themselves better than anyone else. Our bodies are intelligent beings and they guide us. We all know within ourselves the ways that we can better ourselves. It's not going to come from someone else telling you what to do. We already know. But there are people, there are places, whether that's going on a retreat, whether that's working the land, whether that's finding a mentor. We all need ways of holding ourselves accountable to the areas in which we want to improve in our lives. So I would just say, don't look for the answers to be outside, they're inside, but look for the support and the community outside in terms of how to get there.
Thank you. That's very powerful. Thank you, both of you, for this conversation and everything that you've shared. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Amisha.
Thank you so much, Amisha.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.